This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
The Judge Janine Pirro, Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday Morning Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And welcome everybody on this glorious Sunday here in the New York area. Mid-September, time is flying. Just wanted to thank, by the way, all the folks last night at just a tremendous event that my wife and I were privileged enough to be invited to, and that was the Hope Through Education Gala at Trump National in Bedminster, New Jersey. The president was there. He came down, addressed the crowd for a couple minutes. It was a sad night in the sense where, the big elephant in the room was obviously the murder, the execution of Charlie Kirk. It's great to see that the president is lowering flags at half-mast to honor our friend Charlie. I've had many conversations with Charlie. I wouldn't say we were, great friends. He lives in another, side of the country, but whenever he was at Fox or in Washington, came by the Hill a couple of times when I worked there. We always had some, it's funny. I'm a little older than Charlie, we'll put it that way. And I always felt like I was sitting, across from a future president. And that's not, hyperbole in any way, shape or form, folks. Charlie Kirk had all the tools. I mean, just 31 years old, and he had, forget the look, but, he had the talent, he had the tools. The fact that he started Turning Point USA at age 18. Now think about this. At age 18, I'm thinking about, let's see, what college am I going to? What fraternity am I going to pledge? Where's my first spring break going to be? Like, you kind of have some superficial thoughts because you're an 18-year-old guy. Charlie decided that he didn't like the direction of the country anymore and started Turning Point USA from scratch. And now he has millions of followers. His events sell out every venue. You could be talking about arenas that hold 25,000 people. No problem. And the majority of the people that attended these events were young people that never even thought of getting involved in politics, getting involved in a movement. And this was somebody in Charlie Kirk. No one reached across the aisle more than he did. No American. I'm sorry. When you see all the debates that he would do at these events, he would tell people in the crowd, if you disagree with me, I want you to the front of the line and let's talk about it. And he would do so not in a way where he shouts you down, where he's angry, where he shuts off your mic, right? This is a guy who would engage and would do so in a fun, optimistic way. And that's the way you're supposed to do it. And he had his life taken from him just for being the biggest advocate of the First Amendment you could possibly imagine. And this legacy, this movement is only going to become bigger and stronger than ever. There's going to be 1,000 Charlie Kirks now that emerge as a result of this. It still doesn't give, you see this video on Fox, and, having young children myself, it's hard not to, get choked up thinking about it, where Charlie was guest hosting Fox and Friends Weekend. This was over like late July 27, 28. And his little girl is there. And when they wrap at 10 a.m., then you see his 3-year-old girl run to her daddy. And you've never seen Charlie, who's also liked to smile a lot. He's a happy guy. You never saw him beaming more. And you put yourself in that position, when my daughter was 3, and you think about how you're everything, to a 3-year-old like that, and you're everything to your wife. And he also has a young infant son as well, not infant, but probably close to 1 year old now. And the fact that they won't get their dad back, and if you're Erica, Kirk, I still don't know how you quite explain that to him. You know, she said that he's on a work trip with Jesus right now. I mean, that's the best you could do, right? And I just hope they're going to be okay. Now, the good news is, if you want to take good news out of this, is that there has been so much money raised by so many positive Americans, individuals all over the world, South Korea, London, across the U.S., honoring Charlie. And now I think we're up to something like close to $4 million being raised for Erica Kirk and her family, so they don't have to worry about anything again. And that doesn't give them their dad back, and doesn't give Erica her husband back, of course. But, you know, at least it's great to see good things happening. J.D. Vance obviously flying out to Utah immediately and escorting and transporting Charlie's casket on Air Force Two back to Arizona, his home state, and funeral services will be next weekend. The president did say last night during his remarks at Trump National, that he will be there. So, and I'm sure many other dignitaries and just people that, again, a 31-year-old guy who started one of the biggest movements on the conservative side as far as young people. It's not even close. The biggest movement of conservatives among young people, college kids, high school kids, that we have ever seen and probably will ever see again. Now, I hate to get to the negative part of this show, but I'm pretty numb still by what happened. At the same time, boy, I'm pissed off. I am just apoplectic that not even before we knew Charlie was alive or dead, all right, MSNBC, I don't have any expectations that they could do, even in that moment, that they could do something resembling sane journalism. But nope, sure enough, here's Matthew Dowd, now ex-MSNBC analyst, thank God, talking to who should be ex-anchor Katie Tur. This is after Charlie was shot. This is before we knew if he was dead or not. And this is what this freak had to say on MSNBC. This is Cut 9, go.
But following up what was just said, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
In other words, he deserved it. He brought it on himself. And Matthew Dowd said the same exact thing after Trump was shot in Butler, Pennsylvania, July 2024, and said the same thing in September. In fact, that is 1 year ago today, yesterday, September 13th, where Trump would have been assassinated at Trump International, if not for an alert Secret Service agent at that golf course with that sniper waiting in wait at the 6th hole. And I thank God that MSNBC at least fired this guy for saying that in that moment, that's where this conversation decided to go. And by the way, you could tell Matthew Dowd couldn't give up one example of the hateful rhetoric that Charlie Kirk talks about. Oh, all right. So if he's against illegal immigration, if he says that there is a trend among trans shooters, more and more carrying out these things like we saw in Minnesota, like we saw in Nashville, like we just obviously saw with Charlie Kirk, because now the news comes out yesterday, Fox News, Brooks Singman, big exclusive, is that Tyler Robinson, the suspect here, was living with a trans that was converting over from a man to a woman, and Charlie was answering a question on transgender shooters when this shooter struck. So no coincidence there. And then we got to see people on the left on X and this freak show called Blue Sky, where they're making this argument that somehow that, oh, well, actually this shooter was pro-MAGA. He was a Trump supporter. Why? Because his parents were conservatives? By the way, his father turned him in. So just because your parents go one way from an ideological perspective, that does not automatically mean the kid goes the same way. And he had shared more and more his hatred for Charlie Kirk, and obviously now the fact that he killed the guy, I don't think that makes him MAGA. It makes him the exact opposite, as a matter of fact. So nevertheless, here is Nancy Pelosi, this is Cut 11, guys, refusing to take responsibility for all this violent rhetoric, saying, hey, we say all this crazy stuff like calling Trump a fascist, but we can't control how people interpret that. Oh, this is just the worst. This is Cut 11, go.
People don't have any intention of saying something that's going to lead to something dangerous, but we cannot take responsibility for the minds that are out there and how they hear it.
Yeah, actually you can. Stop calling the president a fascist, authoritarian Hitler. Maybe stop doing that when you have no evidence. I'm not going to go down there in terms of like trying to even justify the comment. By the way, here's Senator Chris Murphy, our wonderful senator from Connecticut, saying, you know what? People have to do whatever they have to do to save democracy. Boy, that's not a dog whistle or anything. Cut 12. Go.
Like we're in a war right now to save this country, and so you have to be willing to do whatever is necessary in order to save the country.
Whatever is necessary. Again, this is all intentional. These are not dumb people. They know exactly what they are doing. So even after Steve Scalise, even after Rand Paul was nearly beaten within an inch of his life at his own home, even after 2 assassination attempts on President Trump, and now obviously after Charlie Kirk, this is the crap that we hear from the left and on places like Senator Murphy said that on, of course, CNN, because this is what they live in. And it's so awesome that their ratings, there are more employees at CNN than there are viewers at this point. So I guess, you know, that's something that we could glean some optimism out of. Anyway, this is Joe Concha. This is the Joe Concha Tunnel for Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Back with more, including the great David Webb in just a moment.
The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, everybody. Let's bring in our first big guest. This is, of course, David Webb. You can listen to him daily on Sirius XM Patriot 125, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. Also, you can see him all over the place on Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Nation. We got a lot of Foxes. David, how are you?
I'm doing well, Joe, and always good to be talking to you.
Absolutely. David and I will be co-hosting the big weekend show on Fox News tonight. New time tonight, 5 p.m. Eastern. We start our 2-hour show until 7. Alicia Acuna, Nicole Parker co-hosting for the first time. Nicole, of course, is ex-FBI, so good to have her on tonight, obviously, to talk about Charlie Kirk and that continuing investigation as the web appears to be getting bigger. So 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern tonight on Fox News. Do tune in. So, Charlie, it's been a horrible week. You know, I was at a gala last night at Trump National in Bedminster. The president was there. He was in a different part of the complex, we'll put it that way, but did come down and spoke to the crowd for about 10 minutes. And, you know, the only topic really was Charlie, and that horrible assassination, that execution that we saw at Utah Valley University. You know, your first initial thoughts when you heard the news or saw the news, and from here, as far as like the blame game is concerned, it looks like the left is losing the narrative again as far as who this shooter was and what his ideology was. Not that it matters completely, because that doesn't get us Charlie back, but I'm just going to give you the floor because I'm sure you have a lot to say about this.
I mean, my initial reaction, like a lot of other people, you know, the shock. And I'll separate the shock of the event and the assassination from the surprise. Joe, we've known each other a long time, and I've said this, I'm consistent on this. I am not surprised by the radical actions of the left. It's obvious and even more clear when you look at the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination versus the death of George Floyd, that cities aren't burning, that people haven't taken to the streets to cause damage and harm to others. But right now, the follow-through of this is also something else, which I think most people in your audience would recognize. If you think back to what Andrew Breitbart in his days, and Andrew and I and others who worked to build out the Breitbart news operation and more as it is, Andrew, with his untimely passing, left an organization that can survive him, and does, and thrives today with a radio show and a news outlet and much more. Charlie Kirk did something very similar. His assassination does not end Turning Point USA, and as a matter of fact, the president said, and it's sad that we have to look at it this way, but it's reality, that this platform will become even bigger and Charlie will become a bigger voice as the left have martyred him with an assassination.
Yeah. You're so right about that, because we remember Martin Luther King, and I wasn't alive for that, but, you know, I've studied it and read about it enough as far as his movement and his assassination and how he only became bigger in death. And the same thing with John F. Kennedy. This is basically the first political assassination, I think, since that time of that horrible stretch of JFK to MLK to RFK. But you're so right about as far as the rhetoric that we see in the left. I mean, look, Blue Sky, which is like the liberal, I can't even, like, X I think is pretty neutral, quite frankly, but it's a loony bin over on this social media site, and the giddiness, people posting videos happy that two kids, 3 and 1 years old and a 31-year-old wife just lost their husband. I just can't fathom that we live in a country like that. And I remember, 2001, and I was in New York that day during 9/11. I was in Midtown, so I could see everything from afar, but it was still just as horrifying as one can imagine, just seeing those towers coming down. But I remember then weeks later, George W. Bush, the president at the time, he's at Yankee Stadium, right? Which is, as deep blue as it gets. Right now, that's AOC, Mamdani country. And he walks up to the mound, goes up to the rubber, because Derek Jeter said, don't throw from the front of the mound. They'll think you're a wimp, and don't bounce it up there or they'll boo you. Bush took the advice, and despite wearing a bulletproof vest and a jacket over it, throws a perfect strike, and the roar from the crowd and the chants of USA. And we came together completely as a country. I mean, and now it's like I don't want to say it's 50-50, but it's probably 70-30, where there's like 30% of people in this country who are sick. And it includes, I'll play for you this clip because this really floored me. This is Katie Tur, who's supposed to be an anchor on MSNBC after Charlie was shot, but before he was pronounced dead. So in that time where, you didn't know what was happening, this is the conclusion that she came to as far as what this means. This is Cut 13, guys. Go.
Charlie Kirk is a divisive figure, polarizing, lightning rod, whatever term you want to use. You can imagine the administration using this as a justification for something.
That's where she went, David. Like, boy, what's Trump going to do to exploit this? I mean, this person, just like Matthew Dowd over that network, should not have a microphone anymore. I'm sorry. I'm not all for cancel culture or anything, but if you're a journalist and you go there after somebody was shot, I don't think you should be anchoring any sort of news coverage.
Yeah, and that's something that MSNBC has to look at, not only from the call it a violation of public trust, but from a broadcast perspective. They are constantly bleeding audience. Their audience has evaporated. You and I will co-host a show tonight that has quadrupled their number in that time slot on some weekends, tripling CNN and others, so no one even comes close. But why is that? It's because Americans, regardless of political ideology, except for those extremists, want something in the form of a way of measure. But again, we should not be surprised, and I'm with you. I don't want the power, nor will I ever have the power or demand the power to shut anyone up. But I want the Kathy Turs and the Matthew Dowds and the others, the Ilhan Omars and more, to speak out. I want people to see them for what they are. And for those of you who don't watch overseas media, I can tell you that if you turn to Sky News or BBC, you see what's going on in the UK, in other areas around Europe. You see that Charlie's influence was worldwide because he did something the left feared. He engaged rather than demonized. And he brought people to a discussion, not a final decision by him. And that's why the left hated him. In many ways, they hated him, but that's an effective communicator, someone who asks people to think for themselves, is a threat to the left who need power and control and lockstep behavior.
He is David Webb. You got to listen to him and hear more great analysis and perspective, measured analysis like that. Sirius XM Patriot 125, and obviously on the Fox News channel with me tonight at 5 p.m. on the Big Weekend Show. David, so sorry. The music means we got to go, but I will see you later, my friend, and thanks again for joining us on this Sunday morning. That was David Webb, everybody. And we'll be back with the Joe Concha Tunnel for Towers Foundation Show, Sunday morning show. And we're going to have the great John Solomon. Stick around.
The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back, everybody. And I want to tell you real quick before we bring in John Solomon, to tell you that the Tunnel to Towers Foundation Walk Run is coming up on Sunday, September 28th. That's just 2 weeks from now. All of us here at Red Apple Audio Networks are encouraging our listeners to donate to our team. Please go to redappleaudionetworks.com/walk to donate. Please help us raise the most money for the amazing Tunnel to Towers Foundation Walk Run. Let us never forget America's heroes and what they do for us. Let's raise some money, please, for our veterans, for our first responders, and 9/11 victims. That's redappleaudionetworks.com/walk. Remember, every dollar counts. Okay, let's bring in the aforementioned John Solomon, my former boss at another place at another time when we did TV, when it wasn't really cool to do TV online. And now, of course, John can be followed at J. Solomon Reports. He's an award-winning investigative journalist and the founder of Just the News. He's only worked at AP, Washington Post, The Hill, his current venture, a lot on the resume and a lot of success. John, welcome. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday morning.
Yeah, good to be with you, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I asked David Webb, who was on with me a few minutes ago, and I'll ask the same question because everybody's going to have a different perspective on this. What first went through your mind when you heard that Charlie was shot, or if you, unfortunately, in my case, I was sent the video and I clicked on it to watch it, and it was just one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen because you knew that he probably wasn't going to survive that. So your initial reaction, John, and then what you think overall of the media coverage since then, where, again, I don't want to paint the entire legacy left-wing media as being completely responsible here, but there are enough bad apples to choose from, and I just can't believe that even after something like this, that we couldn't have some measured analysis. No, they went right to the political stuff and pointing fingers and even trying to portray the shooter as somebody who is MAGA, which is utterly ridiculous. But again, I give you the floor. Lots to say here, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, first, when I heard it and then saw it, I knew something was tragic yet again. Here we go again. We've had this spate of violence. We've moved from first debating people to then trying to cancel them on Twitter and censor them, then debank them, then prosecute them, and now apparently that's not enough, so we're trying to kill people. And that's the first thought I had. We're in that vicious cycle, and this feels like this may be another example of it. And then, of course, very quickly afterwards, we were first to report that Charlie had passed, and you just begin to go through that process. I had just been with him 3 weeks ago. I was one of his keynote speakers alongside of Scott Jennings at his event in Colorado. I got some really great quality time with him, and just appreciate all that he does and his commitment to free speech. I mean, more than anything else, he believed that the way we solve this problem is not with less speech, but with more speech, just having civil debates. And someone found that a threat and obviously killed him to keep him from continuing to do it. So it's hard to see. The media's coverage, well, at the beginning it was just classic. You jump in and you're trying to cover, figure out what's going on. And then very quickly, those who have opinion as their goal on the left, I think discredited themselves and dishonored themselves with some really horrible displays, particularly MSNBC, but other places as well. I think factually, most people have tried to stay, even in the legacy media, on the factual side. When you get to the opinion side and the social media side, you see so much hatred, whether it's government employees, teachers, people just saying things that 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I can't imagine people would feel comfortable saying. No filter, no humanity, purely just evil comments. And I think that's the world we lived in. We've boiled the water for so long. We've demonized our enemies so long, particularly on the left, that people don't even realize what they look like when they say these horrible things. And they look terrible to the rest of us, but to themselves, they don't seem to appreciate the lack of humanity or the lack of dignity that they're displaying with those comments. And I think that that's a really, really big issue in society right now. We got to take the temperature of water down. I said this on Hannity the other night. We have created a 3-burner hot stove. Education, the gaming world, which I think is going to turn out to be very important in this case, and social media. And those 3 spots, we're constantly poisoning young people with this hatred and intolerance. And we've boiled their water to a point that more and more people feel comfortable stepping in and shooting someone rather than having a debate with them.
Wow. And we're talking to John Solomon. I think you're so right about that 3-burner stove you just described, education, gaming, social media. On the last part of that, social media, I think when people really see when things really begin to band a divide in this country. And I brought up the example of 9/11 before, and George W. Bush at Yankee Stadium, and then the thunderous applause for him when he walked onto the field. That got even louder when he threw a perfect strike. You could argue that was the highlight of his presidency. And the country truly came together. And now we see, like, time and again during situations where you think we'd see, like, almost total unity, and instead, again, the social media aspect of this, I think since that became huge, we'll call it about 10 years ago, when Twitter particularly really took off, then suddenly we see politicians completely, like, just take Eric Swalwell. If you look at his account all day, it is just constant snark and attacks, personal, nothing ever to do with policy. Nothing like, here's what I'm proposing to make your world better. And I think that, AOC and Adam Schiff, and I could go Governor Walz of Minnesota, who literally just 2 weeks ago was saying that he hoped he woke up to hear news that Donald Trump was dead. I mean, this is insane stuff. And I don't see how we reverse it, John. I don't see how, if something like this can give people, like, pause, those kind of people, that I think that this is the new normal, and that's a dangerous place to be.
It is. Listen, I think you saw it after Trump's first and second assassination attempt after the election, and now with this Charlie Kirk episode, someone on the left has to stand up and repudiate this behavior and say, I won't be part of the Democratic Party, I'm walking out, and then another person follow him and another person follow him. If that does not happen, you're right, it's going to become the norm, and there will be no taking this temperature down, because all the left will have is this constant barrage of hatred. I mean, I just look at some of these comments, and these are, like, really significant people who work for the Secret Service, people who work for government agencies, they're people who are teachers responsible for taking the tender minds of children and educate them, and they're saying things that are beyond comprehension in terms of their evil and meanness. And I think we gotta have a movement soon where people say, you know what, I won't belong to this movement any longer until it stops. And if that and that means corporations, donors, advertisers. We saw a little bit of progress with anti-Semitism after October 7th, and I think that sort of movement that has started to quiet anti-Semitism on college campuses now must be applied to the political left, and we must cause a financial and social consequence to people who are talking this way, or it will be normalized. We're very close to that edge of where it's going to become the normal.
You know what I can't get over, John? You mentioned the type of professions of people who openly celebrated the execution of a father of two and a husband who's only 31 years old because he, had different beliefs than them, and he actually engaged in debate. I mean, it's just amazing. But, I mean, how could these people be so stupid? Like, if you are a professor or a doctor or a teacher or a lawyer, or people who spend a lot of money probably on their education to get where they are, to go online and do something like that. We had a situation here in New Jersey where a nurse heard a doctor celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk, like lively, like, wow, he had what was coming to him, basically saying, like, openly, where patients could hear this guy. And the nurse confronted him and said, you shouldn't do that. This is a horrible example. And then apparently the nurse got fired because the doctor then reported her for harassing him or something. I mean, the fact that these people don't understand, you're going to lose your job because you're going to get reported. Someone's going to see what you're saying, and they continue to do it. I just find it remarkable. I made this comment also on Hannity, I believe, this week when Charlie passed, and I agree with President Trump, and this may be almost a rhetorical question, but I honestly believe, John, that at age 31, if Charlie Kirk 15 years from now, if he did what he did in 13 years since he was 18 years old and founded Turning Point USA, give him another 15, and let's see where this movement is and how big he would become. That's a presidential candidate, and probably a winning presidential candidate, because he had the look, he had the talent, the tools, he understood. Now, there's a performance aspect to running for president, as we know, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Donald Trump, and he knew that, but he was also a man of principle, a man of faith, and unwavering morals. So I think he could have been like the 50th, 51st president.
That's why people were so concerned on the left with him, and why someone felt it his job to silence him with a bullet. And it is remarkable how skilled he was. He had an intellect, and yet he was compassionate. He had a faith about him, and yet he also was willing to be in the secular world and have an honest debate about where we are. And we need more people. If this assassin thought that they were going to silence this movement, all they did with their shooting is make sure that more and more people, there are chapters all across the country now being stood up on college campuses where there were no Turning Point USA things. The money flowing in is extraordinary. I've I had people come up to me on the street in the last few days saying, you know what, I'm a young person. I'm joining TPUSA. So whatever this assassin's intention was, he failed because he's now girded and steeled more people, including people who weren't political a few days ago, to jump into this fire and say, if this is as bad as it's got, I'm standing on the other side of it. And that is a really great first positive step. The second step that has to happen is someone in the Democratic movement, in the left side of America, has to stand up and say, I can't be part of this anymore. I quit until you fix this. And then someone has to follow them, and then another person. If that does not happen, I don't think we're going to see any reduction in this, and I fear that there are many other Tyler Robinsons out there that can be wound up and called into action because they don't see a human anymore. When they look at their predator, they don't see a human. They see an avatar that they were trained to hate in a video game, and that is a dangerous, amoral moment to be in American history.
You're so right. They see an avatar. That's so well put. We're talking to John Solomon of Just the News. JustTheNews.com is where you can get the breaking news that John, every day it seems like they're ahead of the curve. No question about it. I'm going to ask this question. It's a two-parter again. Do you fear for your own safety? Because you do a lot of events. I do, but I'm not you. I don't see me being terribly high on the food chain as far as like we got to take out Concha. But you're pretty prominent and you do events like you did just with Charlie a couple of weeks ago and Scott Jennings. You have a story on JustTheNews.com. The headline is After Kirk Assassination, Political Left Social Media Post Lists Next Targets, and they include, and this is thousands of posts, right? Joe Rogan, J.K. Rowling, she's the Harry Potter author, of course. Ben Shapiro, big name, basically like a slightly older Charlie Kirk and Matt Walsh, among others. So, I mean, the thing is, if you're a government official, if you're Trump, right, not so much as a candidate, but now as the president, I was at Trump National last night where Trump was. It was for an education charity event, but I mean, the security was overwhelming. You had to go with like 5 layers just to get on the property. People like you, people like Charlie, people like Ben Shapiro, you're basically soft targets because you have security, but you don't have that level. So I just wonder, like, do you almost fear doing public events at this point?
I don't, but it should be on of our back of our heads to be even more aware of our surroundings and look for unusual circumstances. Are you ever going to see a shooter on a rooftop 200 yards away? No, right? And I think that is maybe one of the goals here, which is to instill that fear, maybe not even in the people who are speaking, but in the campuses and universities that host these events. And one of the big fears, and Tommy Tuberville, the senator, was on my show the other day, and he said, I fear that universities and venues are going to stop hosting these events purely for the liability issue. And that may be what these radicalized, crazed killers are thinking about, creating a dynamic that one way or the other we're going to sound, so we don't kill you, maybe we'll just get the event locales to stop hosting these events. I think we have to step into the void just like we did after 9/11 and say we're not afraid. We went back to a baseball game 2 days later. We went back to work a couple of days later. We have to do that. We need to improve the security practices as best we can. But I think more than anything else, we have to confront this culture that has literally festered up in ways that I could not possibly imagine even 5 or 10 years ago. And it is with the elected leaders of the Democratic Party. It has to start there. They have to stop the demonization that they're doing. They did not do it after Trump's first and second assassination attempts. They have not yet done it after Charlie Kirk. But there are forces beyond the leadership of the Democratic Party that can apply this pressure. It could be the donor world. It can be the corporate world. It could be the television world. What if news stations just said, you know what, based on what you say, I'm not bringing you on my television. I'm all for free speech. But at the moment you advocate for the death of a person, you have crossed the line. That is not protected speech. That is hate speech. The courts are clear about it. And I think a few prosecutions or a few defunding, much like we saw in the aftermath of in the aftermath of October 7th, in the counter anti-Semitism movement, which I thought really was effective. We need to create that same movement here. Maybe the government has to start it, but private sector has to do it. If you see a politician and they said something, don't invite him to speak at your next party. Cancel the event. If you've been donating, pull back your donation. There are ways for everyday Americans to stop this. I'm not saying don't be a Democrat. I'm saying repudiate this behavior before it becomes the norm.
Indeed. And we're talking to John Solomon of JustTheNews.com. As an example of like not inviting back people who say provocative things. Jasmine Crockett is basically the new face of the Democratic Party. She's replaced AOC, right? She's everywhere. And I'll play this clip for you guys if you want to cue it up. It's cut 8. This is Jasmine Crockett basically making an argument that, well, only white supremacists commit all the crimes in this country. Nope, she really said it. Cut 8, go.
And if you really want to know who the criminals are in this country, you can Google it. You don't have to trust me. But the people that commit 80% of the most violent crimes in this country are white supremacists. Yet for whatever reason, they sit and they serve at the pleasure of the president. They are the ones that were there on January 6th, tearing our democracy down physically. And now we have them tearing us down right here from within.
Yep, she said that on an interview about Charlie Kirk, white supremacists. I mean, but she's going to keep getting invited back, John, because the formula is if you keep saying provocative things, it goes viral. So the idiots that run cable news stations like CNN and MSNBC say, oh, let's put her on because she's causing a buzz, even though it ruins their credibility and there's no factual basis for what she's saying.
It is time for people who watch those stations to cancel their cable contracts. It's time for those who advertise on those networks to defund until they solve this problem. And it's time for Mike Johnson, as Speaker, to take a greater hold of the entire Congress and realize that there are behaviors that are fine. We may disagree with a lot of our political opinions, but a lot of this goes beyond political opinions. And they're going now to the effort of trying to instill hate in our political system. There has to be a repudiation at the political center. The Republican Party has been too cowardly, with the exception of President Trump and some of those who've been fighting anti-Semitism, to truly confront this, to truly punish it, to truly begin to create consequences for people like a Jasmine Crockett, who brings nothing valuable to the debate when she says things like that. There are plenty of valuable things that Jasmine Crockett could do today. Those sort of moments are not valuable. And in an earlier generation of politicians, she would have been sidelined and benched by her own party. But there are cowards in both parties today that aren't willing to step up and repudiate that behavior, and so they're normalizing it with their silence. And the death of Charlie Kirk is just one of many consequences of not confronting this more aggressively. We're going to get there. I feel like this week has been a turning point in that debate. But when we come back to Congress next week, will the Speaker of the House, will the Rules Committee do something to start to punish people who make these things? You can impose fines. These are not protected speech when you begin to suggest that the assassination of a person was warranted, or that falsely you're claiming that there's white supremacism behind Charlie Kirk's behavior. It's just not true, and there has to be a consequence for it somewhere, or we normalize it. We'll see. But there's a lot of cowardly behavior in Washington. This has been brewing for 2 or 3 years, and there are tepid efforts at repudiating it. There needs to be compelling efforts, and until there is, I think every day we're moving towards it. And I want to add another dynamic that, Joe, we don't think about. We're going to have an extraordinary story tomorrow. While we have our own left doing this, and while we have our own provocateurs in America, our enemies overseas, Cuba, Iran, Iran, Russia, and China, have been creating chapters in the United States right next to the college campuses to take young people and suck them into a movement. Maybe it's transgenderism or gay rights or Second Amendment rights, and they're weaponizing them in front of our eyes, just a few short miles from where Charlie Kirk was assassinated. We're going to have an amazing story about one group now. Or we don't believe they're involved in the shooting.
Yeah,
but they are involved.
They're feeling it.
Weaponization of this, and they're directly tied to Cuba. The Trump administration gave them visas to go to Cuba earlier this year. I'm sorry. Why? And why should they have contacts with people? Why should they be advocating? Some of these groups, not the one we're writing about, are advocating for the release of terrorists and hailing them.
John.
But then again, we have a New York City mayor who's done something similar, a mayor or candidate. So
yeah, that may be mayor very soon. Hey, John, they're telling me they're giving me the hard break sign, as they say. So unfortunately, that's justthenews.com. You got to read that story tomorrow, guys, because there's a bigger reason behind all this, not just lone wolves. John Solomon, thanks so much for joining us on a Sunday morning. We'll talk again soon, my friend. All right, that's John Solomon. I'll be back with the Joe Concha Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. We'll wrap this puppy up in just a moment.
The Judge Jeanine Pirro Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Judge Jeanine Pirro, Tunnel to Towers Foundation Sunday morning show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Aaron Rodgers returns to the Meadowlands. That'll be quite interesting. And as I told Michelle before, Tafoya, Jets win this game. All right, so I'm just saying, let's mark it down. I think that Rodgers is not the player he used to be. I think the Jets resented him basically for eating up 2 years of their time. I know he got injured. It's an Achilles. I get it. But I don't know. I just see this as a revenge game for the Jets defense, and I could see Rodgers' first game, new offense, 40-something years old. I think Jets win. I think they win quite easily. Oh, God, I suck. I hope you didn't take my prediction too literally last week, people. Rodgers only threw 4 touchdowns, and the Jets lost 34-32. So my prediction this week, take it as you will, Bears go into Detroit, and they beat the Lions. Yes, you know what to do. The exact opposite. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I am Joe Concha. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Judge Jeanine Tunnel to Towers Sunday Morning Show. You can hear Judge Janine's Tunnel to Towers Sunday Morning Show Sunday mornings at 10. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?